Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Five Nights at Freddy's just completely destroy the box office narrative, not only surrounding its initial release, but also kind of going against this whole model that has been perpetrated by people like Tony over at Deadline and plenty of other so-called box office experts, that having a day-and-date release of a movie is automatically a death knell for the film. Now, it turns out that if you actually turn out a movie that is going to give fan service to the fans that actually want it, or actually have a desire to go see it, or have actually a desire for it to be a thing, right, to actually for it to come into existence. And if you are also able to maybe have some compelling trailers that actually can bring some other people that might be maybe not as interested in the universe, maybe have never played the game before, people like myself, and having some genuine interest in it, casting people like, like Josh Hutcherson, for instance, and other people like that, I think that, hey, guess what? Turns out you can actually have yourself your cake and eat it too, as it were, making $80 million in its opening weekend domestically, but also still doing incredibly well on Peacock as it had a day-and-date model. And so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the second weekend numbers for Killers of the Flower Moon, because even though I myself am a pretty big Scorsese fan, guess what? His film is a massive flop. There's just no real other way around it, unless you are going to try to bring up conversations about, hey, Apple having money to burn or whatever it might be. Ultimately, as far as the box office is concerned, the film is a flop. Now, does that make the movie good? It does not make the movie bad, but it does obviously raise that question of, is there a place for big-budgeted, long Western dramas from Scorsese or people like him in an era where it's a lot harder to get people to go out to the theater? Big questions, of course. We'll go ahead and dive into this. Before we get further, though, please make sure you smash the like button, allow the fire button, obviously smash the rumble button as well, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way, every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So first off, of course, blessed All Hallows Eve, as it were, as many people call it Halloween. It is, of course, the day before All Saints Day, which is actually why it's called All Hallows Eve, right? All Hallows Day is All Saints Day, All Hallows Eve the night before. So fun fact there, as far as a little bit of history. Going into this from Tony, though, Five Nights at Freddy's $80 million breaks the mold on Peacock theatrical day and date release. Now, again, people like Tony and many others have tried to run this for a very long time, right? A very, very, very long time. That if you have a day-date model, that's just going to automatically mean your money at the box office is just not going to be nearly as strong, it's not going to be nearly as good. And though there might be some truth to that, because I do think that we have seen some impacts in the past of other films, I do think it's also important that with the added caveat that if the film is either uninteresting, does not have a fan base, or is not interesting said fan base, then yes, you're most likely going to see that kind of failing result. Whereas if you have a film like this that is able to draw that fan base out, and apparently a lot of people that I've been hearing from that are big fans of the franchise, especially of the gaming franchise of Five Nights at Freddy's, have just been loving the movie, have been loving the Easter eggs, have been loving all of those little things added in. Hey, guess what? It turns out that can actually work, and the proof is in the pudding. As we over here, we have the Monday update. Not a shock here, but Universal Blumhouse Five Nights at Freddy's is coming in at $80 million over 3 days. Interesting that you say not surprising, seeing that going into the weekend, you had the numbers closer to $50 million, but I digress. Over 3 days, after $16 million on Sunday, there was a 34% drop from Saturday's 24.2. Fans of this movie were always dead set on seeing it in the cinema, which made it an experiment for Uni by going day and date on Peacock. And again, it's interesting how again, hindsight is 2020. He's trying to act as if he knew all of these things going into the weekend. There was a lot of speculation and a lot of questions going into the weekend, and to try to say, Tony, that you had any actual, knowledge of this going into the weekend, I think is a little bit disingenuous, to be perfectly honest. People like me, I try to be honest with it, saying, hey, look, Day-Date in the past has shown itself to not be all the best, most consistent thing, but I was also recognizing that the hype for this movie was going in very strong. Box Office Pro, of course, had a very bold estimate for what they thought the movie was going to make, and turns out, guess what? Box Office Pro, once again, in their bold estimate, was actually closer to the correct number versus the so-called box office experts. And so I think it is just, again, very important for us to have that little bit of detail, a little bit of information out there. But again, very, very impressive numbers nonetheless. Going over to the numbers.com, as you can see, indeed, $80 million. That's $21,000 per screen. Very, very strong there. And I think that this film will easily get to $100 million domestic, probably even by the end of this coming weekend. Actually, could even be by the end of this week, because if you think about it, this is a movie that is built for October. This is a film that is built for Halloween, and so I think that a lot of people are probably going to end up trying to go see this movie sometime today, sometime tonight, probably even going further past this in the weekend. Even though we're about to enter into November, it is a Halloween film. I know, River, I know. And obviously that is going to be carrying over probably for the next few days, though I would not be surprised to see a pretty big drop-off for this movie, simply because of the fact it is day and date on Peacock. And also, this is pretty much just for the Five Nights at Freddy's fan base at this point in time. I'll give my own general thoughts on the movie. I did post a review over at Critic List, and I'll pull that up in a second. But just important to point those numbers out. Taylor Swift, the Eras Tour, AMC's exclusive, again, obviously was, shared amongst other screens, but primarily at AMC. Dropped another 54% after 3 weeks of release. And as I've mentioned previously, this film is pretty much made for those hardcore fans who most of them came to see it on the actual opening weekend. Though this film is still the number 2 spot, that says more about the lack of content and the lack of good content at the box office, and less so about the power of Taylor Swift, though again, $150 million at the 3 weeks domestically for a concert movie is still pretty darn impressive. Not nearly as impressive, though, is Killers of the Flower Moon from Paramount. As you can see, 60% drop in week 2. For a film like that, that's a pretty massive drop, especially when you remember this film cost $200 million to make, meaning you're looking at $600 million needed to break even, and it's nowhere close, and it's not likely to get anywhere close to that based on the numbers that we are actually seeing. We're not seeing any type of Barbenheimer effect that would make this film be able to reach the heights of a film like Oppenheimer. And I think a lot of people are probably now at this point saying 3.5 hour movie. Yeah, you know what? I'll probably just wait for this thing to come out on Apple TV Plus, if at all. The next film we'll talk about is also very impressive from Angel Studios. This is the studios, of course, that brought us this past summer's sleeper hit, as many could say, which was Sound of Freedom. Very, very solid movie there. This film, a documentary nonetheless, made $5 million. And so for a documentary, I think just kind of to put that out there, this is a very, very impressive number. There's a lot of documentaries that struggle to even get into the millions of dollars over the course of their entire run. So for this film to get to $5 million already is very impressive. Now, this is not going to see the numbers of the likes of Sound of Freedom, for instance, because this is a documentary and that has a much more limited scope and a much more limited audience. But I think because of Angel Studios and the goodwill, especially that Angel Studios has been able to garner amongst many, many people because of their promotion of Sound of Freedom, and they're bringing that story to light, I think will absolutely bring a lot more people out to go see it versus if they had not done that. And lastly, number 5 spot goes to The Exorcist Believer, 43% drop there after 4 weeks of release. And again, this film is still adding to its own individual profits. However, the $400 million that they spent on the rights to this movie make The Exorcist still nothing, not even getting close to profitability. Now, if we look at the overall worldwide numbers for Five Nights at Freddy's, as you can see, $132 million in its opening weekend. I don't think anyone could have actually predicted it would be this strong. I mean, I'm sure you'll have those people in the comments saying, oh, I knew it would be this strong, or I had a suspicion that it would do very well. Again, I think saying it's going to do better than expectations or do better than what anyone could have expected, okay, I think that there's definitely a lot to be said there. I thought that I had, some of those initial impressions going into the weekend, especially based off those Box Office Pro projections. But the fact still remains that $132 billion, I don't think anyone would have suspected that that a movie based off of a horror game that's been around for many, many years will be doing this well, especially with pretty middling reviews from critics. And obviously critics are pretty awful, which again, big shout out to Critic List. Just for full disclosure, I am not sponsored by them in any way. I'm just a big fan of their platform. As you can see, I actually gave this film a 50%. I thought that this film was actually pretty decent. Now, I give that score coming from a place where I am not a fan of the games, and so there might be a lot of references that I would have found funny had I known the history and the lore of the game. But truth be told, it is actually still a lot of fun, and especially with the fact that it is not really as much of a horror film. And as you all know, I'm not the biggest fan of horror films in general, so that fact actually helps me. It actually makes me it makes me like this film a lot more because there aren't really a whole lot of those cheap jump scares. There's not really a whole lot of that creepy demonic stuff that can oftentimes happen, though there definitely are moments where you're like, ooh, that got a little bit dark. With that being said, again, I thought that overall it was pretty decent, and I think having people like Josh Hutcherson in the film, having people also like Matthew Lillard in the film too, definitely raised the bar, definitely raised the level of this movie and made it pretty fun. Now, I got to see this film on Peacock, so that again is I think one of the benefits of this day and date release model is that if you have a film that is made for $20 million, which again, this film, very, very small budget compared to a lot of other modern day Hollywood films, you have a very small budget, you have a dedicated fan base, you give the fans what they want, guess what? You can then afford to do a day and date model because not only are you driving traffic to your streaming service in the case of Peacock, but then you're also making money and profits at the box office. I know, River, I know. Why aren't other people trying to do this? Because for people like me, who now have 2 kids, I got kids, man. I got kids. Someone like me who has, a 4-week-old and a 3-year-old at home, it's a lot harder for me to actually find time to carve out to go out of the house, especially as we're, going through feeding schedules with the infant. I just think, again, having a model like this is very, very beneficial to someone like me, and I think that this is something that maybe potentially you could actually see other films do down the line. Again, this is how you do it, Hollywood. This is how you're able to make the day and date model actually work. Now, some people can try to speculate saying, well, how much money could it have made had they not done the day and date model? mil. And I would simply say, yes, that might be true. However, think about how less eyes are probably going to be on this property by not having it, right? Because again, someone like me, I would not have had the time to go out to see this movie, and also it's not the kind of movie I would have wanted to leave my house to go see in the theaters. This is a film that I think is much more made, again, for me at least, for streaming, because I have no attachment to the actual franchise. So again, I do think that there is a place for that day and date release model. I think Five Nights at Freddy's is a great example of that. Taylor Swift, $202 million worldwide. Again, very impressive numbers there. This film, though, is definitely on the path of slowing down, especially as more and more films start to get released. And keep in mind that the films coming out over the next month or two are pretty much going to be like the last major releases in many cases, in the cases of many studios, with so many films now being pushed back because of the writers' strike that had happened for a very long time. And, of course, the ongoing actor strike as of the recording of this video. Killers of the Flower Moon, $56 million worldwide. Again, $200 million. This film needs to make $600 million to break even worldwide. $56 million after 2 weeks. I'm sorry, there's just no mathematical possibility for this film to get to those heights. After that, the $5 million, very impressive. And Exorcist Believer, again, it's fine for itself, but for the franchise that they spent a lot of money on, definitely cannot say the same thing. Going over the box office charting, because we love doing charting here over at OMB Reviews, we can now make some projections. And so speaking of Killers of the Flower Moon, $53 million is the first 2 week total. Now remember, typically in the case of the opening weekend worldwide, most films make about a third of their entire box office. And so if that's the case, you're looking at the, again, max of this film being somewhere around an average release for this movie being somewhere close to $120-ish million. However, based off of the second weekend numbers, that is not looking nearly as possible at this point in time, right? This film only added about another $9 million worldwide to its overall coffers after its second week of release. And so what that tells us is a lot of things. So it tells us, of course, one, that the overall box office projections are somewhere between $75 million and $106 million. That means that I think the film, as far as its worldwide box office total will be, is somewhere going to be around $100+ million, right around that point. Now, you could argue maybe because of Oscar contention and other things like that, maybe this film will end up stretching out a bit more. But the numbers based on what we're seeing right now just don't seem to be there. And even if the film does perform better, right, we're still talking about a movie that needs to perform pretty much like no other film has ever performed before in order to get to that point, right? Because 50% of the box office in this comparison means that it's going to double what it has made so far, right? And so if it doubles what it's made so far, which is already a hard feat for most movies, then it's still going to be a far cry from breaking even. So even this film ends up getting to the 30% number. Even this film ends up getting to the 10% number. And we're talking here about the highest numbers that we've seen so far this year, or of just the last several years, right? Most films don't even get close to that comparison of their first 2 weeks to the end of their release. It does happen, but that would still put it far away from that $600 million roughly that it needs to break even. So right now the projections are the film will lose somewhere between $250 million and $236 million by the end of its run. So not looking good at all for this Scorsese film. And again, this is a movie that I have interest in. I actually do want to go see this. Probably will have to wait for it to come on Apple TV Plus because, as I mentioned, I got kids and it's just a lot harder to carve out, especially 3.5 hours for. But those are the numbers right now for that film. Doing some updates for Friday Nights at Freddy's, for instance, we can see that right now it's $49 million in the black, so already profitable and adding to its profits. At a $20 million budget, this film is going to continue to rise and do very well. We also, of course, have the added numbers here for Taylor Swift. Again, estimated Swift costs are roughly around $10 to $20 million, so this film also a pretty big box office hit at this point in time. Exorcist Believer is also, again, individually a hit for the studio, however, still a massive flop. And Paw Patrol also adding to its profits, and amongst many other films adding to their profits. Films like The Creator, Dumb Money, Expendables, and also A Haunting in Venice, still box office flops. And those are currently the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts on these numbers? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, especially, do you think that Five Nights at Freddy's, what do you think the final number is going to be? Again, based on these numbers right here, 250 worldwide sounds definitely like a possibility. We'll have to, of course, wait and see what that week 2 drop-off is going to be, but I think there is going to be quite a bit of cash added after tonight's Halloween audiences. And so let me know your thoughts about that. Anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. Also, thank you very much for putting up with this delayed box office breakdown, as I was sick over the weekend, was sick even all the way through yesterday. Finally started feeling better towards the end afternoon yesterday. Feeling a lot better this morning, though definitely just not 100%. So thank you all very much for y'all's patience with that. Please make sure to smash that like button, a lot of the fire button, honestly, and again, share this also on social media as well. That really does honestly help out quite a bit, especially in the age where YouTube, if you're not putting out consistent content, especially more controversial content, it is just not going to help in the algorithm. So that would really would be very well appreciated. You guys are all awesome. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members: Father Luca Illick, Laura, the Mother Major General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel by the name Eagle Rider. Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Also to Matt317, check out his Twitch channel of the same name. Mr. Roy and ZK-Man, check him out over at xtheboundaries.co. Thank you very much for being my chosen members this month. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, also access to a podcast, access to a giveaways channel, and tons of other stuff, go check out to be a member today in the links in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.